Scars above might not support native HDR, but we have something which is, I wouldn't say much better because it's something completely different, but we have something in this game which is not a given today, not even in AAA games. We have a rock stable 60 FPS mode, and when I'm talking about rock stable, I really mean 60 FPS with no issues at all, at least where I tested the games. There is no bad frame times, no bad frame pacing, nothing at all, just perfect 60 FPS. And on top we have a up to 120 FPS mode. Also no issues at all, at least where I tested the game. We have a perfect experience when you play the game either in 60 or 120 FPS. And just because this game does not support native HDR, that doesn't mean we can't play the game in HDR at all. At least on the PlayStation 5, it's actually quite simple because your PlayStation 5 console supports a feature called HDR always on. So this is something different to the auto HDR function on the Xbox Series, but I'm not quite sure if this game actually supports auto HDR on the Xbox Series because I'm just testing the PlayStation 5 version today. But all what you have to do on the PlayStation 5 is actually set HDR to always on, and you can play this game in HDR, at least in a HDR picture format. But there's something to consider. And if you use the option HDR always on a PlayStation 5, you must or you should use the option dynamic tone mapping on, because otherwise with HDHE or dynamic tone mapping off, you wouldn't have a very big advantage actually when you use this option. Dynamic tone mapping on is actually my recommendation on non-native HDR games on the PlayStation 5 with the option HDR always on. And just a very quick FYI, the HDR always on function on the PlayStation 5 is not the same as the auto HDR function on the Xbox Series. It's complete something different. If a game supports auto HDR on the Xbox Series, then we're talking about more or less native HDR, or at least the game, the content is mastered in HDR. On the PlayStation 5, on the other hand, in cases like Scars Above, this game does not support any HDR. All what is happening is with the HDR always on function, your TV will be tricked into a HDR picture mode and it will run the SDR content from the game in the HDR picture mode. So that's all what is happening. Auto HDR on the Xbox is actually more advanced. But of course, that doesn't mean it looks bad on the PlayStation 5 when you use the HDR always on function in combination with dynamic tone mapping on. Quite the opposite in my opinion, especially on a TV like the LG CX or G2. It really looks much better in my opinion compared to native SDR. But let's move on to the performance of the game, and I told you already, there is a rock stable 60 FPS experience or up to 120 FPS experience. And yeah, I have to apologize, but due to some time limitation what I have lately, I was not able to record actually some frame rates, but there is actually no need to do so because again, the 60 FPS mode is just without any problem at all. And you can believe me, I'm very sensitive to stuttering, to bad frame pacing or frame times. I couldn't find any issue in the 60 FPS mode at all. And the same counts for the up to 120 FPS mode. There is no issue at all. Everything is fine. You have a very nice, smooth gameplay experience. No bad frame times, no bad frame pacing. Everything is just, yeah, I would say hunky-dory. And if you're now wondering yourself, how can you actually activate the 120 FPS or up to 120 FPS? Because most of the time it runs between, let's say, 90 to around 120 FPS. This is, yeah, a good question because there is no setting in the game at all. You must activate the 120 Hz output on your PlayStation 5. And of course, you must have a 120 Hz screen. So make sure that the 120 Hz output on the PlayStation 5 is set to automatic, and very important, make sure that VRR, variable refresh rate, is set to automatic and also apply to unsupported games, because if you would not activate this setting, then you would not have VRR in the game, at least on the PlayStation 5, because this game does not support VRR. But when you turn it on, apply to unsupported games, then you will actually enable VRR in the game. And this is necessary because we don't have a rock stable 120 FPS mode. It's up to 120 FPS, but again, when you activate VRR, it is a perfect experience on an LG G2 or the LG CX. Okay, my friends, so what is my summary now to this game? And I'm actually surprised because I was not expecting much, because this is not a AAA game at all. It's not even a full price game. I paid 60 Australian dollars here, which is quite cheap considering other prices for games. And yeah, I'm actually surprised. I mean, I admit the graphic or the visual quality is not on AAA standard or AAA quality, but again, I wasn't expecting this. We have issues with some animations sometimes. The textures are a little bit of low resolution. I mean, overall, the graphical quality, yeah, it's maybe just average. But, and this is a big but, of course we don't have HDR support, but forget about this for a moment. We have a rock stable experience in terms of gameplay. Perfect 60 FPS and almost perfect 120 FPS. So we have a perfect up to 120 FPS experience, and this is nowadays absolutely rare. And that's why my recommendation is, if you're a fan of Returnal, give it a try, because you may like this game. And again, I agree that this game is not on the same level in terms of graphic like maybe Returnal. Returnal has actually a better look in my opinion, but we have a 120 FPS mode, which is rock solid, not stable. We don't have perfect 120 FPS, we have up to 120 FPS, but most of the time around 100 FPS, and this is a big difference in my opinion compared to 60 FPS, at least on an OLED TV like the G2 or CX. It is significant better to play with a higher frame rate. So in my opinion, this game is worth to try. And yeah, just give it a try. Put in the comment section what you think about the game. And yeah, thank you very much for watching me. I see you guys next time. Bye.